Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Heal with Kat podcast. My name is Kat, and I am your host. And happy Tuesday if you are listening on launch day. Welcome to the Heal with Kat podcast. If you are new here, like I said, my name is Kat. I'm a Family Constellation Therapy facilitator, which is a mouthful. I'll be abbreviating Family Constellation Therapy as FCT for this week's and every week's episode because, yeah, it's a lot to say. But welcome if you're new. I'm so grateful that you're here. I don't know how you found me, but I'm glad that you did because this week's episode is going to be big. We're going to go deep. If you are not new here and you are a part of the community and you are joining me again for another episode, I say this every week, but thank you. Seriously, 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 thank you because the reviews, the comments, the shares, everything has been bringing this incredible momentum to the podcast and to this work. And it's just really a blessing and such an honor. So thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing and engaging. And also, guys, thank you if you took my brand new offering, the Cycle Breaker Archetype Quiz. I launched it last week on Tuesday, and I have had hundreds of people take the quiz already, which is crazy. I actually had a clip from last week's podcast go viral on TikTok. As of today, we're somewhere near like 40,000 views, tons of comments, shares, and saves, and my podcast views have been going up and people have been taking the quiz because it's a brand new offering and I announced it last week, and it's just been so wonderful to be able to see how this thing that I've been working on for 3 months is supporting all of you and understanding how you had to cope or survive in your family system as a child because of ancestral things that have happened, and how it's showing up in your life today. And that's what we do in FCT, right? We're looking at what happened in your family that's also happening and showing up in your life today. And there's so many different avenues that we go into. If you're new to FCT, I highly recommend going and listening to episode 52, where I get into the ins and outs of what family constellation therapy is. Today, we're going to be talking about generational curses. We're going to be talking about the root of our fears, and we're going to be talking about victim energy. All three of these things have to do with each other in some regard when it comes to family constellation therapy. Also, next week, I have about 4 more launches happening all in one day. So if you're not following me on social media, if you're not following me on YouTube or TikTok, go especially follow me on Instagram where I do most of my announcements. Definitely go follow me on there. Everything is in the show notes below because I'm really excited about the new website I'm launching, 2 other new offerings for you. We're just expanding. We're just growing. We're just leaping into this energy, and I'm so stoked about it. And then last thing before we get into this week's episode, every month on the last day of each month, I announce a free family constellation therapy giveaway. It's 2 hours one-on-one with me. I take you through an entire session. Again, if you want to know more about that, go listen to episode number 52, where I take you through what a session looks like with me. Go read the testimonials on my website. Go see how other people are being supported by this work. All you have to do to win that free FCT is rate, subscribe, review the podcast, screenshot all of that, send it to me in my DMs on Instagram so I know where to find you if you win. I put your name on a list. And then, like I said, last day of every month, I go into ChatGPT and I say, here's this list of people, pick one winner. And so it's completely unbiased. And yeah, so if that's something that calls to you, definitely go check it out. Listen to that episode and enter to win. So this week, generational curses, the root cause of our fears, and the victim mindset. Like I mentioned a little bit earlier, these all have to do with each other. I'm going to take you through the ins and outs of each one individually and how they're all connected. A while back, I had a friend of mine send me a YouTube video of a woman who was talking about generational curses from a very religious perspective through the church. And it really got me thinking about how family constellation therapy, or FCT, frames the idea of curses. And just to touch on this now, just to get it out of the way, because if you know me, you're going to know this. If you're new here, it's important for you to understand that the way I work with family constellation therapy is I have one foot in the physical, understanding trauma, understanding family dynamics, human behavior, psychology, all these parts of who we are as a human being. But I also have one very grounded foot in the spiritual, understanding mediumship, spirit babies, past lives, soul core wounds, soul decisions, speaking to your guides, looking at the bigger spiritual picture of your soul. These are two very, very important parts of who I am. So in talking about ancestral trauma, it's not just ancestral trauma, it's that and the spiritual component of who we are. In that spiritual component, I do believe that energetically and spiritually people can be cursed in a sense, okay? Like, for example, I throw this out all the time because I just think it's hilarious and there's some truth to it, but the Kardashian curse, right? Like we've heard of that, where like every man that they date ends up like having a career flop, or like they just get excommunicated from society. Like we look at Scott or Kanye or Lamar, like you can say that that's a curse, right? Like, I don't really believe that it's not a curse, but it's more of a collective energy that's being created by a group of people. And I'm going to touch on that more specifically in a second around a curse. But it goes into a bigger conversation about how we can create energy with our thoughts, our actions, our beliefs, our words. And maybe the Kardashian curse has like a little bit to do with past life energy of like them being witches, which I still think could be real. But maybe that past life energy is coming through them into their life now. Like, again, we kind of have to say yes and when it comes to FCT. But to me, personally, definition of a curse is not a witch over a cauldron making a potion. It's an energy. And so it's important to keep that in mind for today's session, for today's episode, is that a curse is better viewed in terms of an energy, a vibration, a collection. It's when certain energies take on a form of some kind that create a vibration, and then people start living in that vibration, and then they start feeling plagued by it, and then they're like, I'm cursed. But just as the curse is created, the curse can be healed. Energy cannot be destroyed. That's physics, but it can be transformed. So just keep that in mind. In Merriam-Webster, I looked up the exact definition of what it is. It says that a curse is a calling for harm or injury to come to someone. Sure. Like, sure, we'll give that some power, okay? Like, yes. But through the lens of FCT, if someone comes to me and says, I'm cursed, to me, what I hear is a deep family pattern that is stuck. And the world talks about curses all the time, and we live with them, and then we feel powerless, but we're not. We just need to go deeper into the awareness of what a curse could potentially be. There's society's view of it. I just think of TikTok, right? Like I think of the girls that like pull the tarot cards, and like there are girls that I follow who pull tarot cards, and I'm like, are you in my fucking head? But then there's like the more like baity ones where they're like, they got their cauldron and they've got like stuff, and they're like, when you get the Ace of Swords or whatever and you're fucked for your it's like there's so many extremes of how people use this stuff. And again, I'm not saying that people can't be witches and use energy to create a curse. I'm just saying that there's more to it. But curses have longevity. That is something that we know about curses. Curses are not, oh, I'm cursed once. It's like curses usually feel like they ripple out into each generation or to a long period of time. And specifically through our family system and FCT, curses feel like they have a chokehold on an entire family system, and it's felt by those people in the family. So people will come to me and say, you know, there's a lot of heart disease in my family, or we just have a hot temper and blow up and then we get over it. Or there's a curse, I feel cursed by the anger in my family. So curses get passed down in the family line due to unconscious choices, repeated behaviors, and it's usually around trauma. And what do we know about trauma? It's dense, it's heavy, and it can create an energy of powerlessness and confusion. Hence the curse. I've heard extremely religious views around curses where they blame curses on sin. Personally, don't align even thinking about that, because the word sin to me, it makes me want to crawl out of my skin. It's so religious, and I was raised in a Catholic home, and I've got my own stuff with religion. I think personally that religion just perpetuates the theme of guilt. I think that in order for us to heal a curse, we need to move away from guilt. We need to move away from pointing the finger and blaming and shaming. It's more about acknowledging what is with curses, acknowledging what happened, and then reframing it, shifting the energy. It's a lot lighter. It's a lot more humane, I think, to work it with curses like that. So if we reframe the word sin or curse and use the phrase instead, behaviors based on trauma, or even choices based on unmet needs, then we really soften the view of the curse. It doesn't give it so much power. And in FCT, we believe that a curse has a root cause. There's a root trauma that is attached to that curse. And just like a pattern gets passed down, the idea of a curse does too. So like I said, if someone comes to me, I actually had a client come to me and say, I feel cursed with anger from my family, then we need to start unlayering the reasons why everyone is angry. Or if someone comes to me and says, my family feels cursed because we can't keep money, we need to look at any money trauma in the family. What's interesting about studying and working with ancestral trauma is that people oftentimes poo-poo the beliefs or the subtle things that have happened in the family system. We think that a curse happens from one big thing. But that's what CPTSD, complex PTSD. It's small things that have happened over and over and over again. And so something big could have happened in your family lineage that caused this massive ripple effect, or it could be something very small that happened over and over and over again that poked and poked and poked and created a big wound over time. And so really, when stuff like that happens, people in our lineage just needed a little therapy, or someone to validate their feelings or talk through them with their experience. And that's why I believe in FCT so much and feel that it's so healing for people, because everyone is being acknowledged and honored. Everybody is being acknowledged and honored, and everybody just wants to feel seen and heard and appreciated. So we know that trauma is not actually the event that happens. Dr. Gabor Mate talks about this extensively. All you have to do is Google on her or YouTube search Dr. Gabor Mate definition of trauma. He says that it's actually trauma is an event happens, then an emotion is felt, a reaction to that emotion happens, and then trauma is formed based on the reaction to that event. So it's repeating the reaction or the coping that we had, or the lack of tools that we had to deal with a situation, or rather with abuse and addiction, the powerlessness we felt around that event. And then we just get re-triggered by it, and then it turns into trauma. So if the reaction to the event or the coping mechanism or the defense mechanism, the feelings or the event is not acknowledged or healed in you or in your family lineage, those things just start to get passed down in the form of a theme. So the theme could be anger, or depression, or heart disease. Our emotions are energy. Don't forget that. I mean, go read the book, The Body Keeps Score. We experience emotions in our body based on events that happen around us, and then they get stored in the body and it takes up space. And if we can't learn to process those experiences, they just sit in us. And so when those reactions, those coping mechanisms, those defense mechanisms, those feelings, etc., when they get passed down generation after generation, then it causes a pattern, causes a curse, right? That pattern then becomes a family story that people start identifying with. They create an identity around it, and then it starts to permeate out into the rest of the family. And one of those ways is a curse, and one of those ways is a deep fear, and one of those could be abuse, and one of those could be addiction. I mean, you just name it, and it just, the list goes on. How it shows up, right? That's the pattern, how it shows up. And so generational curses and fears can go hand in hand, because it's that unhealed trauma, those reactions to the event that didn't get the time and love that they needed and the space that they needed. And so it sat in the body of every single person. It became a story for everybody in the family. And now we have a generational curse. Now we have a generational fear. Now we have a pattern that keeps us stuck. And many times when we are looking at the fears in a family system, we also need to look at something called a victim-perpetrator dynamic. This is something that Bert Hellinger, who is the modernizer, the father of Family Constellation Therapy, talks extensively about. So to take that a step further, this victim-perpetrator dynamic and how it plays into this generational curse. By definition, a victim is a person who has been harmed or injured as a result of an event, action, or crime, and often feels powerless, oppressed, and persecuted by others or someone else. And that person who feels like a victim may perceive themselves as a target of unfair treatment and adverse circumstances. A perpetrator is an individual who commits an act, typically one that is harmful, illegal, or immoral. And this person is responsible for carrying out or instigating actions that cause harm, injury, and damage to others. So the perpetrator is the person that does something to the victim. And this dynamic between humans, this victim-perpetrator energy, shows up a lot with like war trauma, abuse, addiction, but it's very complex and sometimes a complicated dynamic that can be rooted in shame or anger or mistrust or confusion or manipulation and unhealed trauma projection. Like, I think that we don't want to use this explanation around people that do really harmful things, but it is their trauma. Yes, they may be predisposed to things genetically, but where does that come from? It comes from trauma in the lineage. Epigenetics gets passed down, certain behavioral traits, right? There's also the soulic part of it, which we can't ignore, but there is a reason. I mean, not to like go down the rabbit hole of the soul, but the soul is source. It's God, if you want to use that word. It's good. It's our human stuff that we carry with us in lifetime after lifetime, or that we pick up in certain lifetimes generationally, that we become predisposed to making certain choices that are not in our or the collective's highest and best good. I don't mean to simplify it that way, but it kind of feels that simple in some ways. What happened to everybody? And so in FCT, we think about victim and perpetrators in three groups. There's a collective energy around victims and perpetrators, because remember, it's a dynamic. Where there's a victim, there's a perpetrator. So in that dynamic, there's collective victims and perpetrators, us and them, Jews and Germans, us and them. That's an example. The second one is individual, me and you, me and my mom, me and my dad, okay? That dynamic. Then there's the interior group, interior figures, as Susie Tucker calls it, which I loved. Me and me. What is my conflict within myself around being a victim and a perpetrator? Like, what is my relationship with myself? And so while those three groups may seem separate, collective, individual, and interior, they're actually three parts of a larger whole. How is the collective affected by victim-perpetrator energy? How are we individually affected by it? And then how do we reconcile that energy within ourselves? And that's when I talk about family systems having a vibration in a family system. And Dr. Bert Hellinger talks about this, but Spirit always shows me it's like a cluster of cells or an actual star constellation. I like to look at it in the form of cells for some reason. It's like a cluster of energy. And in that cluster of energy is your family. Every single individual person makes up that cluster. And if there's war, that has an impact on the family system. And if there's somebody that caused harm through abuse, that impacts the family system. The hard part is that at the nucleus of that family system is source and love. But unfortunately, everybody is wearing a protective mechanism around them to be able to lack the ability to see that. And we become so separated from that. We become separate from ourselves. We become separate from that vibration. We become separate from the collective. And this is why I don't agree with the term black sheep, because I think the black sheep indicates more protection, more separation. But in FCT, we're looking at the whole and how to bring love back into the family system through ourselves to create more order, to create more peace, to create more acknowledgement, to receive more blessings, to be who we're meant to be. So here's an example of a curse, and I'm going to use money because money is easy to talk about. Well, in the sense that it's easy to understand. If a client comes to me and says, I feel cursed with money, what I want to ask them is, what happened in your family system? Did someone steal money? Did somebody in your family system affect the financial abundance of your family or someone else? We have to look at the money trauma that happened in the family to create this belief that money is bad or money doesn't come easy or that you can never have enough of it. We have to get really nuanced on some of the beliefs or the fears or how you feel cursed to understand what it is in connection to that trauma, because there is a through line. So an example could be, let's just say that someone in your family takes someone's business from them in another family or in your family. Or let's just say that they harm someone in the family through money. Let's just say that there's a huge fight over something that happens with money and they don't talk anymore. And there's this separation in the family around money. The way that this affects you generationally is that you now carry the energy of the wrongdoing. And the way that you carry it is potentially through things like a lack mentality around money, or you don't deserve it, or you don't trust money, or maybe you don't trust people with money, or guilt or shame or embarrassment, or a feeling like you can never have enough money or be successful. So those break in the bonds, they have a huge impact on us, whether it's one generation or whether it's like 5 generations. So you may hear me ask something like, oh, did someone in your family's business get stolen? Did someone in your family shut down someone's business who was a competitor in order to get more money? Did they lose a huge investment? Were they going through the Great Depression? Did they lose their house in 2008 with the recession? Did someone in your family back then, like, 100 years ago, take someone's life because of money, or even now? So if your grandpa stole someone's business, okay, or their money or something like that, your grandpa is technically a perpetrator in the family. So now there's perpetrator energy within the family system. And then that creates a trauma in the family system in a certain density. And then you're born and you know that grandpa did something wrong. Maybe you heard about it. Maybe it was a felt sense in your body. Maybe you learned about it through FCT. Maybe someone tells you a story. But you know that inside of you, you want to try to make up. You want to do the right thing. Grandpa did something bad. You want to do the right thing, right? So you will try to reconcile with it, which in some ways can keep you a victim of grandpa's wrongdoings. So you're then like tied in this weird energy dynamic where grandpa's the bad guy. You don't want to be connected with the bad guy. In other ways, you may be just like grandpa. You may start identifying with grandpa and harming others like he did. So there's 2 ways that it can go. It can go, I'm the victim of grandpa, just like the actual victim. I'm going to be just like grandpa and I'm going to do what he did. How we would heal something like that in FCT is that we would put you, your grandpa, and the victim of this crime on papers in the field and see what happens and see what the energy is looking like with all 3 of you in there. And then we would do the healing statements and we would give that energy back to grandpa. So whether you're enmeshed in the victim energy or whether you're harming like he did, you're entangled in something that isn't yours. And it's keeping you loyal to grandpa and connected to him somehow. Because FCT, we're looking at order in the family system, and everybody has a place in the family system. When someone is excommunicated, a missing person, they're pushed out of the family system because they do something bad, future generations will look for that person. It's just subconsciously and energetically what we do. If grandpa was pushed out because he did something wrong, you will want to search for him somehow. You will maybe search for him through being the victim, or maybe you'll search for him through being just like him. Either way, you're going to be searching for his role. You're going to be searching for his energy in the family system. And you will be connected to him in some way. What FCT does is we acknowledge that person. We don't have to embrace them, but we just acknowledge them. Grandpa, you did this thing. It pushed you outside of the family. You deserve a role in this family system. You had my mom who gave me life. I'm very grateful for that. In this way, I am carrying the energy of what you did. I need to give it back. We need to give it back to grandpa so you can be your own person and not continue the pain, whether it's through being the victim or whether it's being the perpetrator. The bigger conversation we're having with victim and perpetrator energy is what division or split or disconnect happened in the family system, and how is it repeating now? Because that victim perpetrator energy is a block. And in FCT, the only way we're able to heal this is to face the perpetrator and give back what we are carrying for them, what's not ours to hold. Grandpa, I'm not carrying this pain around money anymore because of what you did. So we do this by facing them on the papers. You and I will talk about it together, and then we do the healing statements. And like I said, we give it back. Now, if the idea of giving that pain back to grandpa is hard for you to grasp, I want you to try to see it from this perspective. In our family systems, when there is a lack of love or a lack of connection or a lack of warmth or a lack of our needs being met, we will start to take on the things that we see happening in our families that are blocking us from getting those things. So, meaning, if you see your mom is struggling with health issues and she can't show up for you and you can't love you and can't take care of you and your basic needs are not being met, then you might take on the belief that connection with your mom only comes from bonding over health issues. So then you continue that with a pattern of, I also have health issues. There's something wrong with me. I can never be healthy. And then those beliefs manifest in your body and you're sick, plus whatever else comes with that. Being sick and struggling with health issues is not what you're here to experience, and it's not in your highest and best good, but it's what you know. It's how you know how to connect, so that's how you take on mom's stuff. You can replace that illness with mental health, physical health, abuse, addiction, drinking, other beliefs, other behaviors, other fears. It's subconscious. It's primal. We don't think to ourselves as children, I'm going to be sad just like mommy. You're just sad like mommy because that's how you're trying to survive and get connection with her. So if you took on your family member's stuff, let's just say you took on mom's sadness because you love her. You said in that moment as a child, I will give up myself for someone else's love because I'm not getting my needs met. In FCT, when we give it back to your mom, we are now saying, I love myself enough to give up what I thought was love. This is not my sadness to carry. This is my mom's. And I trust that when I give it back to her, not only will she be able to handle it, but she will have a whole team of guides and angels and whoever else and herself to deal with this, because our family members are not incapable. They're not. I mean, maybe at a certain point they become incapable in some capacity, but in general, your parents are not incapable, even if they give you the belief that they are. It's just that sometimes their stuff gets in the way and they're scared, or they don't know how, or they don't have the tools, or they're fearful, or it's not societally expected of them, or it's not normalized or generational, whatever it is. So you might be thinking, why would I take on my mom's stuff or grandpa's stuff and think that that's love? What does love have to do with any of this? Here's what I'm learning. In our family systems, we know that when we connect with our family, we feel loved. When we feel chosen by our family, we feel loved. It's these little ways that we feel we belong with our family, because belonging means that we matter. And when we feel we matter, we feel loved. So it's not this blanket statement of love that I'm looking for in a family system. Oh, you got to love your mom. It's not like that. It's like, what are the ways that you felt that you could get love from your mom? It's the little ways that we feel we are loved by how we belong, how we connect, how we fit in. So if everyone in the family has a terrible relationship with money and you don't, or you find that you are very abundant with money, you might not ever believe that you're worthy of having that money in abundance because no one in your family did. And if there is an energy of perpetrator around money in the family, that's going to have an impact on your belief of money and your ability to feel worthy of it, because money is worthiness. And then I would just take you back to the mother wound. So first, we need to heal it within ourselves. We need to acknowledge and recognize how that trauma is happening in us. And then we need to acknowledge it in the family system. And this means acknowledging the person who was the perpetrator. It also could mean acknowledging the person who is the victim, because that also carries an energy, but let's just focus on the perpetrator for a second. So if I had you face a perpetrator in the field, and I've done this many times before, it's not about embracing them, okay? I'm not asking you to love them and have a relationship with them and we're good. It's just acknowledging what is. Bert Hellinger talks about this all the time. FCT is acknowledging what is. It's important to acknowledge that the perpetrator and what they did was a matter of fact and not focus on the crime itself. And Susie Tucker talks about this when we're facing victim and perpetrator energy in our family. It's about, and I'm going to quote, what doesn't serve me versus having to annihilate the other, sacrifice myself. What she's really saying is, I am acknowledging what happened. I am facing what happened, rather than making myself the perpetrator to stay in connection or making myself the victim to stay in connection. Then, when we do that, when we realize and acknowledge what doesn't serve us, we access mobility that leads to us moving forward and moving out of that dynamic that creates confusion and moving into inclusion in our family system through acknowledging rather than through embracing. I think I'm saying this without saying it. FCT wants you to include that perpetrator. If they're in your family system, they have a role in the family. That was the hardest thing for me in this work. Many times in our society, we are very black and white with our relationships with our family. You did something bad, you're a bad person, I'm going to push you over here. But in reality, that person, and I said this before and I'll say it again, they have their trauma. They are a perpetrator because they have a perpetrator. Okay? And so when I put them in the family system and I ask you to acknowledge their role in the family system, I'm asking you to acknowledge what they did, but I'm not asking you to embrace them. But we need to acknowledge their role in the family system, because the problem is that the trauma is repeating because nobody's looking at it. That's the problem. Nobody wants to face what happened. This is why you're the cycle breaker, because you're facing it. Because you're looking at Grandpa's paper dead in the face and saying, Grandpa, what you did was wrong. And I'm having to pay for that now. And I'm not going to do that anymore. So I'm going to give you back your stuff. I will acknowledge you as my grandfather. And maybe that's it. Thanks for being born so you had my mom and then I could be here to be me. You don't even have to call him Grandpa. You can call him by their first name. I don't care. It's your role with them. It's your relationship with them if you want to have one or not. But they're still your grandfather. They still participated in the experience of you having life. We do have to acknowledge what they did and face it. When we bring awareness to it, it heals and you get to move forward. And the reason that we have to acknowledge his role is because we need order in the family system. We need everybody to be in their rightful role, because just like our family system runs on order, the universe runs on order. In the spiritual world, there is order. Humans graduate to guides when they're done reincarnating. And then there's many levels of guides. And then above guides are ascended masters. And then there's angels. And then there's archangels. And whatever whatever else we don't know about up there. And then you get to source. On earth, there needs to be order as well. There needs to be order to control the chaos. In a family system, if everyone is passing around the pain of the past and everyone's in a vibration of chaos, well, yeah, someone's going to come into the family system to bring order and healing, and that could be you. That is why I say you are moving from black sheep to cycle breaker, because that transition is a huge initiation for your soul. Huge. I mean, I did not realize that when I started this work 3 years ago. I was like, cycle breaker, what the fuck is that? Who cares? No one in my family cares that I'm breaking cycles. Literally. I mean, no fault to them, but like my family's not bending over backwards, like asking me how work is going and like all, and you may not realize it now, but that cycle breaking is making a mark on the family system and on the world that you are stopping the chaos. You are choosing to say, no more to repeating this pain and harm. This ends with me. And I think you're saying, this was too painful for me to hold. I can't allow other people to feel like this too. It has to stop. It has debilitated my life. I can't let that happen again. And I know that's a huge motivator for me. I think of the generations to come and I think to myself, I can't imagine my children or their children's children suffering from the war in Lebanon that's affected me from my family, and how it shows up as OCD, intrusive thoughts, or the endometriosis in my body. If I have a daughter, I never want her to experience such painful periods, or the victim energy of my family, or whatever. I can't feel that anymore for myself. And honestly, by healing it with me, I think if I know Family Constellation well enough, that ripples out into the family and it ripples out in my body. This is why FCT does inspire cellular healing and change within your body epigenetically. And I talk about that in a brand new offering I have coming up. I'll announce at the end. But there are ways to use this work to heal your body so that you don't pass this stuff on. So I just want to go back to the victim energy stuff for a second, because we've talked a lot about the perpetrator. In some hard, difficult, wrong in the sense of like wrongdoing to the human, it gives people identity. Being a victim gives people purpose and meaning and identity. That's not to say that what people go through is 100% valid and true. People are victims of stuff every single day, of perpetrators. And the way those perpetrators project or carry out their pain and trauma can affect someone's life forever. Especially with abuse, especially with addiction. We have to leave room for that. There are real victims out there. However, I have a unpopular belief, I guess, about being in the victim mindset that I'm going to share with you. And I think it's just something to think about. Knowing that people are victims every day of so many things, I think that people start to create an identity around it. Like I said, being a victim. And I think that's where people get stuck. And that is exactly where the victim and the perpetrator energy creates a block. I think it's important to remember that on the healing journey, a benefit of healing is empowerment. Yes, you were a victim of something, but the unpopular belief is you don't have to be a victim forever. I actually think that being in the victim energy or mindset for a period of time is a very healthy place for us to find ourselves, because many times as victims, we are gaslit or we gaslight ourselves. So we deny our reality of what we experienced. Oh, it wasn't that bad. Oh, I don't really know if that's sexual abuse. Oh, this, oh, that. Well, is spanking physical abuse? Listen, this is the brain's way of coping and surviving with abuse or pain that we were put through. We minimize it and normalize it because it's so shocking to the brain, the body, and the energy in our system that because nobody is validating that it was wrong, we're just like, God, that was hard, but whatever. Spanking's normal. But once we start getting help and support, we may find ourselves in this place where we realize that we are or were a victim of something. And that acknowledgement of being in that victim role is validating and comforting for the parts of us that had to shut ourselves off to survive. It feels good to be validated in that role as victim. And we may need to be in that for a while until it feels like, okay, I was a victim and it feels real in us. I was a victim. I was a victim of abuse. I was a victim of whatever, you name it. For many people, being in the victim mindset can be a reflection of us validating our experiences and our feelings for ourselves for the very first time. So I'm not saying don't be a victim. Own that part. But eventually there needs to be a shift. To go from victim to healing mindset, we still need to be able to validate our experience. But the difference is if you can shift from the belief of poor me into the energy of this is what happened to me, I'm not responsible for what happened to me, but I am responsible for healing it, you will see yourself shift lifetimes in terms of your healing journey. The victim's biggest strategy for healing needs to be how to cultivate self-authority. Learning how to actively respond to your circumstances and how to reclaim your power. And to create more self-authority in your life, you need more self-awareness, empowerment, boundaries, reframing, and getting support. So here's an example of the victim mindset. I want you to pay attention to this because I'm going to give you an example of a different perspective. It's more healing mindset. So the victim mindset is, my parents were terrible people and I hate them. I'm way better off without them in my life. And who needs parents anyways? I can raise myself. It's all their fault. This is why I drink. I am never going to get better. I'm going to be the black sheep of my family and I'm never going to have a family of my own. There is a plethora of truth in that statement, okay? But did you notice where it fell into victimization? Where somebody could take those words and make them an identity? This is why I drink. I'm never going to get better. And if they really do want a family, but they're terrified, I'm never going to have a family of my own, going against their own desires for the family. You see how they're enmeshed in that victim-perpetrator energy? I'm a victim. Because of them, I can't have what I want. So here's how I would personally shift this into more of a healed mindset out of the poor me victim energy. Listen to the difference. My parents were humans and they had their hardships and traumas as much as they had good moments. They made mistakes and they hurt me. It sucked to grow up in that environment and I wish I didn't have to, and what they did was wrong. But I did. I did go through it, and I take my parents for who they are and I accept them. It's not my fault how they treated me as a child, but I am responsible and capable of healing from it and making sure it ends with me, and I'm allowed to have boundaries in those relationships. The difference in those two statements is that we validate what happened with emotional maturity, but we don't carry hatred. We don't carry separation. We can still be angry, but that anger shows us where our boundaries were and are, and we believe that we are capable enough to transform our story from poor me into something more empowered, more powerful. And that transition is supposed to take time. It's not supposed to happen overnight. It happens in layers, and we move slowly and we hold space for the parts of us that we feel we are processing as every single piece arises. If you struggle with victim energy or perpetrator energy, go do internal family systems work. Go create a relationship with that part of you that feels like a victim, because I bet you that part of you that feels like a victim and can't move out of it needs more validation, needs more love, needs more care, needs more warmth. You need to tell that part of you it was not right. And you need to keep telling yourself it was not right until you feel it in your body. It was not right what happened to me. And then you'll be ready for the shift. Because when we move out of the victim energy, we become a survivor. And those things that happened to us are a part of us. Remember, we need to create healthy separation and identity from this event or things that happened, and we can carry that piece of us into our lives, but it's not our whole story anymore. How many times do you hear the stories of celebrities in the Me Too movement, right? Who came forward and spoke their truth, but they said, I'm not a victim and I want to be a voice for other women. That is a healing mindset. Yes, they were a victim of a horrible crime against their bodies, their sovereignty, the beauty of a woman, they were taken advantage of and manipulated. And they are shifting that into, it wasn't my fault. And I want to give a voice to others. You see the difference? My father is a really great example of this, actually. Not in the Me Too movement, obviously, but with what he went through in his life. When he was 8 years old, he lived in Lebanon. He was the youngest of 5 children, and 4 were living at the time. And the first bomb that started the civil war off in Lebanon in the 1970s landed on the sidewalk in front of their home. The shrapnel came up. They were all having breakfast on the balcony of their home. And my dad, shrapnel came in through behind his right ear. He has a piece of shrapnel in his heart, so he can like never get like those things on his chest or like what is it, that thing you go into? My God, I'm this go into this tight space. It's not a CT scan. It's not a mammogram. Hello, I can't think of the name. You know what I'm talking about, because the magnetism will literally rip the metal out of his heart. Interestingly enough, he has AFib. So that was interesting when that was starting to come up. My uncle, his entire insides in his stomach were outside of his body at 12 years old, and he was in a coma for 3 days or something, 48 hours at like 12 years old. My aunt, who's since passed from breast cancer, she had shrapnel in her hands and had deformities in her hand and arthritis her whole life. And then my oldest aunt, she didn't have anything physically, but emotionally, you can only imagine what that's like to go through. My grandparents, same, nothing happened to them physically, but they had a very difficult life where they couldn't stay in Lebanon. They lost all their money because of the war. They had to flee to France. They went through a lot of trauma in France, being outsiders, being immigrants. People were racist against Lebanese people in France, calling them names. And my dad and my uncle went to boarding school and they were shipped off, and, you know, just traditional for the times, but a lot to go through. Then they immigrated to the US. They had no money. They were going to school, barely getting by. They asked my grandpa for this last bit of money to start this company. And he could have said, I'm a victim. I'm never going to amount to anything in my life. Same with my uncle, same with my aunts. We're victims. We're victims. They acknowledge that something terrible happened to them. How they deal with the trauma is their own journey. That's their own choice, whether they deal with it or not. They do acknowledge that they are victims of war. They are. But they turned it into something powerful. And I think that's why I'm so drawn to this idea of turning pain into power, because I've seen it. I've lived the second generation of watching these people who have effects of war happening to them. And I have it living in me in some capacity, right? Because epigenetically, that changes somebody. Characteristically, personality-wise, that experience changes somebody. Right? And if it goes unhealed and unacknowledged, well, it creates a ripple effect in the family system. So we have choices every single day. How we move through them takes time. So to kind of summarize the victim-perpetrator energy stuff, in short, our family members may be impacted by trauma, or they may be the cause of the trauma. You, as the cycle breaker, will try to right the wrongs of the family. But before we try to do that, we may get stuck or entangled in the patterns of the wrongdoings. And this is also a way we create and repeat the pain. So we may be stuck with the victim, or we may repeat the perpetrator. And this is where our work is, to give back what's not ours so we can be who we are meant to be, in our own sovereignty, in our own truth, in our own soul. And the way that we repeat that stuff could be the same choices or themes or beliefs or fears or feeling, coming back to that. I also want to circle back to the root cause of our fears, because I started to touch on this earlier in the episode, but in FCT, we look at our biggest fears in connection with a fear of our ancestors, or something that happened to our ancestors that created a fear in them that then has been passed down. So sometimes our biggest fears do come from our own experiences that we've had, but sometimes they come out of nowhere and we can't explain how we got it. For example, like somebody comes to me and say, like, I have a very weird fear that I'll never be able to have a kid, but there's no evidential proof of that. Well, there's usually a tie or a cord or a piece of that fear that can be tracked back into the family system. So Like I said, if your biggest fear is you're going to lose a baby, or your biggest fear is you're going to get in a random car accident, or your biggest fear is you're going to be trapped somewhere and you won't ever have freedom, like whatever your biggest fear is, and you have no evidence or proof of that in your current life, it's curious. Can we look back into the family system and see if there's a tie? Sometimes it's past life. Sometimes the past life will choose a family system that has the same fear in order for you to heal it. It's all interconnected. So the best way to understand your biggest fears is to just bring more awareness into the intricacies of them, how they show up, what are they around, and start exploring where some of it may stem from the family. That's the easiest way to explain how our biggest fears come about. So there's the family part of it, there's maybe past life soulic part of it, and there's also the human experiences that we've had. And more often than not, they're all tied together somehow. The best way to start to become aware of the biggest fears patterns, of the generational curses, of the victim perpetrator stuff is either through FCT, or actually have a brand new offering that I'm launching next week. It's called the Age Mapping 3-day mini course, where you will literally step into the world of this exercise. I'm going to teach you how to age map. It's an exercise that we do on paper, and we uncover the hidden stories in your family's past. And so by identifying key moments of trauma at different ages of your ancestors, then we can shed light on maybe how they're affecting you today at those same ages. And that is largely epigenetic, but there is an energetic component to it as well. So in this 3-day mini course, not only am I going to teach you how to do the age mapping exercise, but in that course, I'm also going to give you my ancestral subconscious meditation, which many of you have done before. It's now going to exclusively live in the mini course. So if you want access to that, it's going to live in the mini course. You will also get to deep dive into understanding exactly how trauma is passed down through your family energetically and epigenetically on day 3. So day 1 is the ancestral subconscious meditation. Day 2 is the age mapping exercise. And day 3 is learning how to take all of that information and understand how it gets passed down into you, how you're carrying it. And this mini course has been in the works for literally 2 years. My mom is actually somebody that planted the idea of this in my head. And then it's just kind of been, the wheels have been turning, but it finally came into fruition 3 months ago. And guys, it's all of this information, all of these exercises and tools for $35. That's it. That's all. I've literally spent the last 3 months making this entire mini course for you to move through in 3 days. It's self-led, so you don't have to go through it in 3 days. You can spread it out over time. The videos aren't that long. It's going to be super supportive for you because, one, you may not be ready for FCT. You also may not be ready for an ancestral chakra reading, which is a new offering. Well, it's a revamped offering I'm bringing back next week. I kind of stopped doing it for a while. But you may not be ready to go into these bigger pieces, right? The cycle breaker archetype quiz, it's free, it's easy, it gives you some information, like it's a dip in the toe of the ancestral work with me. But for $35 to go into this much information is an incredible opportunity. So if you want to learn more about this workshop, I'm going to link the waitlist in the show notes below, and I'm including a discount code for $10 off to celebrate the launch, okay? And the $10 savings is only going to be available for the first 3 days of the launch. So make sure you keep an eye out on your email if you're on my newsletter or on social media, because I'm going to announce the launch soon. But it's just, I'm so excited because it's going to give you a tangible, visual, real life, this is what's repeating in my family. You can take that information and you can bring it into an FCT with me, and then we can literally physically address that pattern. You can even go into the workshop and be like, I want to learn more about what's going on in my life right now. Like, I'm 33 and I want to know what my family was doing at 33 and see if there's anything there. Like, it's such a dynamic tool, and we go into it in the workshop, but I'm just so excited for it. I'm so excited. Not only that, you've got free information on the podcast every week. I've got stuff on social media that I'm posting. There's so many different outlets that you can get free information from me for ancestral healing. Take advantage of this free stuff. You know, my sessions are not cheap. They're $300 for 2 hours, and they're powerful, but they're not the only way. There's other ways that I want you guys to access this information. So check out the wait list, sign up for it if you're interested. If anything, you'll just get some info when it launches, and then occasionally I'll put out some content. But yeah, I don't want to be one of those people that like, I hate when I go on my email and like I buy like a random digestive enzyme, not speaking from personal experience, and then I get blown up with emails like, is it hard for you to poop? And I'm just like, we're here, like we're writing emails about this, but here we are. Anyways, guys, that is this week's I can't, I'm just dying over the poop thing. I can't even finish my thought. That is this week's episode. I really hope that it was supportive for you in understanding that you're not cursed. There's just a pattern of trauma that keeps repeating, that everyone is creating an identity around, and it's kind of building on the vibration. You can heal it. You can diffuse it. You can alchemize it. You can transform it. It is so, so possible. I just wish you guys knew me 3 years ago and saw me then, and I'm literally living proof that this shit works. It's crazy. And there's other people out there who are also living proof that FCT is so powerful and ready to help you transform your life. So don't forget, rate, subscribe, review the podcast. Ask me questions. If there's something on this week's episode that you're like, I don't really understand that, DM me on Instagram. Comment below in YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. Like, comment a review on Spotify. I'm here to support you. I know FCT is a lot to understand. I know that it can be complicated sometimes because there's so many different parts to it. Let's make it easy for you. Let's make ancestral healing accessible. Let's create ease and flow with this so that you can finally be who you're here to be. Okay? So don't forget that. I'm going to announce the free winner of this month's free FCT on July 1st. So make sure you follow me on Instagram because I announce it on Instagram. And thank you for being here. Sending you my love. And I will see you next week on Tuesday for next week's episode. Thanks, guys.